This is Moral of the Story. Interesting people telling their favorite short stories and then breaking them down to understand what makes them so good. I'm your host, Max Chapovsky. Today's guest is Brett Baer, an Emmy Award-winning producer and writer that has worked on shows like New Girl, 30 Rock, United States of Terra, Joey, and more. Growing up in Deerfield, Illinois, Brett was so captivated by television, he converted his parents' basement into the Hollywood of the Midwest. Deconstructing cardboard boxes to recreate the swamp from MASH, the studio set from Letterman, and other classics of the day. And while other kids played with Legos, he bribed his sister and neighbors with Twizzlers to be his on-air talent. Fast forward to the early 90s when Brett decided that the entertainment industry was finally ready, moving to LA to attend the University of South California's School of Cinema Television. After dazzling his classmates at the Groundlings Sunday Company, he joined Acme Comedy Theater, the legendary sketch group, where he would meet his writing partner, Dave Finkel. Moving on to take the world of animation by storm, Brett wrote for the Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain, earning him a Daytime Emmy nomination for some of the wittiest dialogue this side of Family Guy. Brett knew that he was destined for primetime, however, and soon made his move to Norm, joining the ABC sitcom as a story editor. Stints on Just Shoot Me and Happy Family followed, and in 2007, finally vindicated, Brett won the Outstanding Comedy Series Emmy for 30 Rock, which he co-executive produced. Not satisfied with just one award, he took home another Emmy for his work on the United States of Terra. Finally, that mere nomination for Pinky and the Brain was a scar healed. Along with his partner Dave, Brett went on to create the hit series New Girl and more recently Bad Sisters, a binge-watchable show now streaming on Apple TV+. Brett isn't just a writer, mind you. An avid reader with a seemingly effortless understanding of world events, Brett enjoys a healthy discourse on the intricacies and nuances of geopolitical relationships and offers a balanced view to those who seek it. A fanatical White Sox fan, Brett has an iron grip on all team stats and trivia, and when it comes to playing, he prefers pickleball, crushing his opponents, likely while regaling them with the news of the day. But if you think he's a boring, middle-aged suburban dad with a proclivity for watching baseball from the living room lazy boy, just tell him you're in a hurry to get to the other side of LA. With an intimate knowledge of every artery leading into and out of the city, Brett will proceed to transform into Mad Max and get you to your destination on time, even if you soil yourself in the process. And so, a man of many talents, of contradictions embodied and aspirations achieved, Brett Baer, welcome to the show.
Oh my God, where did you come up with all of that? I mean, honestly, I know exactly where you got it because I can tell the writing is my partner, Dave Finkel. He gave you some of that, I'm sure. Oh my God, that's insane.
I actually wrote the whole thing myself.
Did you really? Well, now I'm nervous. I mean, I can't live up to that. I wish I was a little drunk.
Well, here's the thing. You don't have to live up to any of it. You've already lived up to it all.
Oh, I guess that's true, technically. See? You're a step ahead of me.
So, set the stage. Is there anything we should know about the story before we get into it?
Yeah, I'll give you a little background real quickly. You kind of mentioned I grew up in Deerfield, Illinois, which is on the North Shore of Chicago, which I know, Max, you know very well. But for those who don't, it's the area of the planet where John Hughes made all of his movies, right? Breakfast Club, Home Alone, Risky Business was shot there, which I was actually in. I had one line in Risky Business, but that's a different story. And it's not, admittedly the toughest part of town. It's not the inner city, but the school I went to had some very rough kids in it because there were a lot of my classmates who were the children of some very tough people who were connected to, let's just say, the Chicago Syndicate, so like every recess was a little bit like The Sopranos. I mean, it was like they were literally cracking yardsticks over each other's heads, or comparing their brass knuckles with each other under the jungle gym. One kid, tragically, his father went missing and then was found in several dumpsters around the city, and that was like, so even though it was this like John Hughes world, it was like directed by Marty Scorsese, I tell you all that to tell you that I was not one of these tough, rough kids. I was I was a slight boy. I was not the most masculine kid, and I was a bit of a pixie. I enjoyed dancing and dressing up in costumes and putting on shows in my basement. And these tough kids would play games and I don't know if you can say this, but I'll say it anyway, called Smear the Queer, which I'm just reporting the facts. That was what the game was called, Smear the Queer, and you can only guess who they wanted to smear. It was me, So I got beat up a lot. I got made fun of a lot. I was bullied very hard. And one day I just kind of lost it. I couldn't take it anymore. And it led me to stand up for myself eventually. And I believe also led me to one day leap 3 stories, almost killing myself in the process, live on CNN. Well, I mean, it wasn't live. It was, I almost wasn't live. But anyway, that's where it's sort of the setup for the story.
Oh my God. First of all, little did I know that some of the meanest gangsters of Chicago got their start on the mean streets of Deerfield.
Yeah, well, it's actually, there's a little incorporated area next to Deerfield called Riverwoods where it's very Sopranos-like, and, beautiful big homes, secluded, and, you would call, literally, you would call somebody and their father would answer and it would be like, 5643. And you'd be like, instead of hello, it'd be 5643. You'd be like, okay. Am I supposed to place a bet? Can Andy come out and play? That kind of thing. So, and the kids could be nice on occasion. I'm sure some of this is just my perception as a boy who was beat up all the time, but it felt oddly rough and violent considering that it was, it was Deerfield.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Well, let's get into it. Tell me a story.
All right, I'll tell you a story. So everything I just told you, like I said, one day I couldn't take the bullying anymore, and I decided I was going to stand up for myself. And I said to myself, you know what? No matter what happens, you're going to fight back. You are going to just take the hardest take you can. You're going to jump in there. You're going to fist fly, kick, whatever you have to do. And sure enough, I got picked on one day, and I went for it. And I lost badly. I got the shit beaten out of me, as I always did. But this time was different because this time I refused to show any pain whatsoever. I was like, I'm not going to let them see me hurt. And every time I got punched in the face, I would just smile. And then when the kid was done kicking the crap out of me, I got up, I brushed myself off, and I just walked away. And the pain in my face was so much less than the joy in my heart that this kid felt so impotent and was so frustrated that he didn't hurt me. And I realized something, that might be my survival technique. That could be my coping mechanism. So I taught myself to actually suppress the pain, and I decided I would dictate these events myself. And I started challenging these tough kids to do whatever the fuck they wanted to me. I'd let them, punch me in the stomach as hard as they could, or kick me down the slide or throw me down the stairs, and I would just take it like a rag doll, and I actually trained myself to just absorb all this pain. And a funny thing happened, which was they stopped picking on me. They were just more interested in like having fun throwing me off of stuff, and I could take it, and it hurt. Believe me, it hurt. Like I had the bruises and scars to prove it, but I wasn't getting beaten up. It was me in charge, or so I thought. So one day I used all these talents that I had developed, these sick talents, combined with some gymnastic skills I had, and some acting comedy chops that I'm now using as a writer. And I actually became a really good physical comedian. And over time, I started earning money as a physical comic because I could do this stuff. And people would hire me to fall down and go through walls and stuff. And I studied like the masters, like Buster Keaton. I studied religiously. Mo Howard of the Three Stooges was a great knockabout comedian. My favorite movie was Hooper, starring Burt Reynolds, which was about the Hollywood's greatest stuntman. And that became my favorite film of all time, and I watched it 300 times. So when I was 24 years old, I got the opportunity to audition for the Universal Studios Western Stunt Show. And I was like, oh my God, this is my calling. Like, this is what I think this is my future. And I did great. I sailed through the audition. I was funny, I was fast, I could pretend to throw a punch, I could take a punch, I could fall down, etc. I could ride a horse. And on the last day, they said to me, okay, so tomorrow you're going to come back and we're going to do high falls into an airbag. And I was like, huh? High falls into an airbag? Like, that I'd never done before. I'd seen it. I mean, it's a magnificent thing to watch these guys do this, right? And we all see it in the movies, and I always wanted to, but I'd never done it before. And I was like, well, what the fuck do I do? I mean, high falls into an airbag. I mean, people die doing this stuff. I don't know if you haven't seen the movie Hooper, there's this amazing high fall that this stunt performer named A.J. Bakunis does, where he jumps 230 feet. It was a world record at the time, off of a helicopter into an airbag, and it is a thing of beauty. Later that same year, 1978, A.J. tried to re-break the record, and he went through his airbag and died. So, I mean, it's dangerous. And look, we were never going to be jumping anywhere close to that high, but I didn't know how high we were going to be jumping. I had no idea. So all night long, I'm in a panic. I'm like, what the fuck do I do? Like, I can't do this. I shouldn't do this. I really shouldn't do this. But when I left for the audition that day, I looked across the street as I was getting in my car, and I saw like a little 2-story roof, and I said, you know what? If it's that high, I can do it. Anything higher, I'm just going to have to walk away. So I get to this stunt campus where we're going to do these high fall auditions, and I see the tower for the high falls, and I go, oh my God, it's exactly the same height I said I could do. This is fantastic. So they gather us up, and the stunt coordinator goes, okay, ladies, you'll be jumping from that tower. And he points to the tower that I was talking about just a minute ago. And then he goes, men, you'll be jumping from that tower up there. And he points way over our heads. And there's a tower that is so high over my head, I didn't even see it. And I'm like, oh my God. It was like 3 stories. I mean, it was a big deal. And I was like, what do I do? Like, I can't go through with this. But all of a sudden, that little kid on the playground, I looked around at all these professional stuntmen that I was going to be competing with here, and I was like, they became the guys on the playground. And I was like, I have to come through. Now, look, the stuntmen were great. They were very friendly people. They were not the bullies. But in my mind, I projected onto them, this was the playground again. I was back on the playground. I had to go through with it. So they gave us some rehearsals for the audition, I should say, before we actually had to do our audition to do the high fall. When it was my turn, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, there's a whole way of doing this so you don't get hurt. I didn't know. I just knew what I'd seen in movies. And I had to climb up this little rickety ladder that was like swaying. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm afraid of heights. So you add that into the equation.
Oh my God.
And I keep climbing and I keep climbing, and I'm like, where is the top of this thing? What am I doing? And I get on this little tiny platform that's about 2 feet wide by 4 feet long. Like it's a trapeze artist platform that you see in the circus, you know, those little platforms things? That's what I'm standing on, right? And I'm like, well, here goes nothing. And I do the fall, boom, I hit the bag in a flip, and it goes well enough. Like, I survived. And I was like, you know what? That wasn't so bad. And I got to say, it doesn't feel good to land on an airbag. It's not like jumping into a marshmallow. It hurts, you know. It's like smacking a water balloon with the back of your hand, you know. But I did it. I got 2 more practice runs, and I was feeling like, you know what? Good enough. Like, there were some people who were really talented. I was like, I didn't even think I could do it. I did it. 3 stories into the bag. So now it comes time for the actual audition. They've got us all going one at a time, boom, 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 boom. And all of a sudden I look over and a CNN camera crew has shown up to, I don't know why, but they're going to videotape this audition like as a human interest story. It's like, don't you have a Persian Gulf War to cover or something like that? So when it's my turn to go, when they call my number, I start walking over to that little ladder I told you about, and all of a sudden the CNN cameraman, some big dumb guy with a camera on his shoulder, he starts climbing up the ladder in front of me.
What?
And I'm like, what the fuck is he doing? Anyway, I'm like, well, this is my audition. I don't have it. Nobody's saying, you know, hey, don't go up there, dude. So I start climbing up behind. So now the 2 of us are on the ladder, and it's swaying, and I'm like, what was scary before is now ultra scary. We get up on this tiny little platform I told you about. He's standing behind me, shooting over my shoulder as I'm going to do my fall. And I'm like, this I really don't need. I've only done this 3 times in my life, and it's all been in the last 2 hours. So the stunt coordinator who was counting people down, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, he decides all of a sudden now he's on camera. Stunty McGee needs to be funny. So Stunty McGee starts doing like some stupid Western improv with me, and I'm like, oh fuck. So I start improvising back with him because we're on camera. It's my audition. I got to do it. And he does one of those dumb jokes where he kind of goes like, he goes, you want to see my quick draw? And then he doesn't move, and he goes, there, you see it? And I'm like, that is the dumbest joke. And then all of a sudden it goes bang. And I'm like, oh, that's my cue. Now I'm like, I start going, like I got shot. I kind of grab my chest and I go back and I bump into the camera guy.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, oh, right, I forgot he's up. Oh! And at that moment, I'm already going forward. All of my mechanics are off. I'm totally jacked up. And I'm going, but I'm like falling. And I can remember that feeling of like, oh, this isn't good.
Oh, my God.
I over-rotated so that my feet hit the bag first. Which, if you can imagine pushing down on one side of a balloon, the other side of the balloon comes up, right? So my feet hit the bag first. The bag comes up from behind me and smacks me in the back of the head like a Mack truck hitting me. I'm telling you, it was the worst pain I've ever felt. It hurt hard. And I can hear everybody go, oh, you know? And then I don't remember much because the whole world was spinning. Everything was ringing. People were climbing onto the bag to pull me off. And all of a sudden, Stunty McGee's in my face, making sure that I'm alive and that I'm okay. Yeah. And the one thing I can remember from this moment is from the look in his eye, I was not getting this job.
Oh.
And the next thing I know, the woman reporter from CNN has like got a microphone in my face, and I'm probably speaking nonsense and gibberish. I have no idea what's coming out of me. So somewhere probably in Atlanta, there's a tape of me making a complete ass out of myself. But I didn't die. And that is a victory in itself.
What a story. Okay. I have so many questions.
Let's
go.
You
answered the first, which is you don't have the tape. I think that it's worthwhile tracking it down because that has to be incredible.
I think I'm too afraid to look at it. But, yeah, you're right. I should call somebody and say, hey, I just wonder, do you have this piece together? But, I mean, it was not pretty. I did not look good. And I got hurt bad. I think I was concussed, you know?
Yeah, so did you end up getting it checked out? Or was this back in the day when, like, you're fine, just walk it off?
No, it was, you're fine, just walk it off. I swallowed the pain, and I swear on my life, 45 minutes later, I was doing another stunt for the audition where we had to do one of those, I think they call it, like, swing for life, which is kind of like one of those rip line kind of things.
Yeah.
And you swing, you know, you come down a rip line, but then there's a release on it, and then you drop into a bag. That wasn't as high, but I will tell you the funny kicker to that story is while we were doing that, it wasn't me, but while we were doing that, the airbag would inflate, But in the middle of doing it, we had an earthquake in California that day,
of course.
Which knocked out the electricity and knocked out the generator on the airbag.
Yeah.
And so as they were about to do a stunt, the airbag started deflating. And a guy almost was like mid-stunt when that happened. So, again, like, you know, I have such respect for these people. I really love stunt people. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of them in my career, and I really appreciate them. And they do everything they can to protect the safety of the people they're working with, especially the great ones. My neighbor is a stuntman who doubled Billy D. Williams as Lando Calrissian, and he's a great guy. I love these people. I really do. And you recognize that there is no foolproof, you know, safety net for them. And something is always possible, and they take that risk, which, you know, I kind of admire. But it is a sickness.
I mean, that is crazy. What acting do you do when you're falling off a 3-story tower?
Well, I'll tell you something. You know, some of these guys are so good and so in control of their bodies that they can do different things in midair as they're falling that make it look like, you know, they're scrambling to try and save themselves. Or, you know, there's different kinds of falls, too. Like, you know, doing a flip head over tail, you know, is one thing. But there's something that's actually harder that these guys do where they'll fall straight down face first, and then they're capable of turning their bodies in midair so they land on their backs without flipping like a somersault. So they're just kind of rotating, and that is like the muscle control that it takes to be able to do that in midair. But these guys can do it. A lot of them were professional high divers who had then transferred over to like doing stunt work, and instead of landing in water, they were landing. You know, I didn't want to even get on the high dive growing up at my local pool. But these guys are like doing flips, and I mean, some of them were doing like double flips and kips and turns and this and that, and it was very impressive. But
I mean, when you're standing and looking at the high dive at your local pool, it seems completely manageable. And then you get up on it and you're like, oh my God, like the perspective, same distance, but the perspective is outrageously different. And I can just imagine looking at like a 2-3 story building, you're like, that's fine. And then you get up there and you're like, oh my God, I'm about to die.
I actually was going to tell you this. For the proper perspective to understand what you're doing, you can stand up and put like a throw pillow, like a couch throw pillow down on the floor at your feet, or like a large coffee table book.
Yeah.
That was the perspective I had. Now take a deck of cards and put it in the middle of that coffee table book. That's the red target that you're supposed to hit in the center of the bag so you don't, go off the side or get bounced. And so when you're standing there looking down at a deck of cards at your feet, that's the feeling you have. And I mean, I can't believe I did it, but I think that those kids like drilled into me this desire not to give in and seem or feel weak. Now, I will say it took me a lot of time, a lot of growing up, and a lot of therapy to get to a point where it was like, why are you so willing to abuse and hurt yourself to be accepted by other people? Mm-hmm. And getting to a point of going like, oh, I don't need to break my, elbow or, have a cracked vertebrae. Apparently I have. I can be me. Like, it was okay to be that delightful little pixie, but I was terrified into becoming this thing that hurt me in many ways. Yeah. But it protected me. And as I got older, I was kind of able to sort of disentangle that infrastructure of protection from around me and kind of go like, it's okay that I'm not, I'm not some big, tough, macho knuckle breaker. That's just not me,
Yeah. It almost seems like it was twofold. It was having a sense of control, taking back the control from the bullies on the playground.
Absolutely.
And also not being a threat to them by allowing them to do whatever it is they wanted to do, but on your terms.
Yeah.
And so that was it almost seemed like a coping mechanism. But what's crazy is when you're standing on that tower, you have to give up all control.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
It's so crazy.
It's really this very strange paradox, isn't it? Because it's about like believing that you have control, and yet you are genuinely not in control. And I think ultimately that's the takeaway or the lesson, which is that, or the moral of the story, that all of us probably find these coping mechanisms that in the long run are more perhaps, I don't want to say damaging, but are not productive ultimately, and that there's a healthier way of taking one's journey in life that probably requires a tremendous amount of inner confidence and strength that most of us as young people, when these things get formed, don't have.
Yeah.
We all grow up just trying to get by. Mm-hmm. And it goes in many different ways. I mean, some people become, for example, overstudious, and they, become like dedicated to the A+ in a way that, like, at 30 or 40, a lifetime of that starts to take a toll, and they go, hey, maybe I need to kind of enjoy my life a little bit more. What have I become? Because I'm kind of this automaton. So that's another version of it. Obviously, the harder things like drugs or alcohol, those are other coping mechanisms that probably feel like they're working, in a moment, and then one day they're not. So this was definitely something that I realized, it made me some money. I will, Dave and I, one of the first things we did that I don't think you mentioned was a Saturday morning TV show where we did silent knockabout comedy and throwing each other downstairs and through walls. And, that was the first real professional gig I had prior to the sitcom work that I did. But, at what cost? Because there are times when I wonder, am I going to have like mental problems from all the pratfalls I did and the concussions I gave myself. I don't know.
Did you end up doing any more stunt work after that, or was that the end of your stuntman career?
No, it wasn't the end. I mean, that was probably in the early 90s, and Dave and I did our TV show, I think, in 1997, and I had been in sketch comedy, and when I met Dave at Acme, one of the things that drew us to each other was our love of physical comedy. And so one of the first bits he and I ever did together was a bit called Crazy Monkeys, where I don't know if you remember this, but there was a guy named Bobby Barasini who had a monkey act. He had an orangutan act that used to always be on The Tonight Show. He performed in Vegas. And so I played Bobby Barasini, and Dave played all the monkeys. And then and Bobby Barasini allegedly had been accused of like not treating his monkeys well. Right. And so in the sketch, I was an abusive character who was beating his monkeys, and the baby monkey at the end of the sketch kind of like had it. I mean, listen to the story, right? I'm basically telling my story all over again. Yeah. So the baby monkey finally decides to seek retribution, and then it turns into kind of a Martin Lewis thing where we're chasing each other all around the theater over seats and through walls and jumping through windows and shit like that. So that was like in the mid-90s, and then we got the TV show where we did more of the same, in this on a show called Monkey Boys. Monkeys are a theme in this.
Do you think there's any correlation between your coming to terms with what all of that playground stuff meant in your life and the move away from the more physical comedy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, aside from the fact that at a certain age you go like, oh, I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, sure.
That's part of it. But yeah, I do think, I think as I got more evolved and as I grew more to be appreciative of my whole self, new dynamics and new colors came to the forefront that I think, like if you look at the arc of my TV career, for example, mine and Dave's TV career, we started in hard joke comedy, not physical comedy, but like Norm Macdonald, working for 2 years on the Norm Macdonald show, it was all about learning hard jokes. And so we did a lot of hard joke sitcom writing. And then as we get to about 10 years later, we start doing the United States of Terror, which is really just kind of like a half-hour drama, even though it was called a comedy, but it was not. It was way ahead of its time. And it was a very dark, very deep show that we ended up show running eventually at the end of the series. And then New Girl was kind of maybe a blend of that because it was emotional and this sort of thing. But by the time you get to Bad Sisters and our being in love with the material that led to Bad Sisters, I think you see more of a complexity in the amount of work, in the kind of work we're doing that I think kind of got less reliant on big, broad, wacky knockabout stuff and started to get a little bit more emotionally rich because I think, I'll speak for myself, I can't speak for Dave, but I just got more comfortable being honest about those parts of myself and the feelings I was having and where I felt like I was succeeding and failing in my life and wanting to explore that. And I think that's, probably to answer your question, a definitive yes.
Well, I mean, I think we, on one level, we kind of have to thank those future mafiosos for setting in motion what would eventually become Crazy Monkeys.
Well, that's true. I'm hoping that they had their own journeys and that they all discovered their own fuller selves, and maybe I don't know. And again, all I know is what I saw in the news and who I was looking at. I don't know what their involvement was. I just know that it seemed like it was a really tough life. Like I didn't mention this, but my main bully was actually an adorable little self-avowed 12-year-old Nazi, and I only call him a Nazi because he called himself a Nazi.
Oh my God!
And I think that he was just mostly angry that he wasn't Italian and wasn't like allowed into the cool club and needed an identity, so he became a Nazi. And I'm half Jewish anyway, but he didn't call me half the names. He called me all the names, all the fun names. He was the main source of pain in my life. So
the band leader,
yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, right, like on the one hand, you have them to thank for starting this first part of your career. On the other hand, it's so interesting how as we evolve, and your story touches on this, as we evolve, two things happen. One, we realize that other people don't care as much as we think they do.
Great point.
And
Great
in
point.
parallel, we start to care less.
That's exactly right.
Just imagine,
That's exactly right.
Imagine the shit you used to care about and what was so just dominating in your life, the things that would dominate your thoughts. And now you look back on that, you're like, not only was that completely irrelevant, but nobody cared about it as much as I thought they did.
Yep.
Because they were doing the same thing I was doing, which they were so self-absorbed that they were too busy to even think about what I was dealing with.
Fantastic point. I mean, the reality of this is, and it kind of goes to the storytelling stuff, the reality is everything I just told you is true, but it's true from my perspective, right? Mm-hmm. Like there are other kids who went to Wilmot Elementary School and junior high and Deerfield High School who did not have this experience, who would say, what are you talking about? It was all pretty in pink. I don't know what you're like. You're nuts. Now, so I believe everything I told you, I saw with my own eyes or I heard. But again, to your point, Max, we blow these things up to this large scale because that's how important they are to us.
Yeah. And
in reality, maybe this wasn't what was happening. You know, maybe it was my perception of what was happening. But what's important is recognizing that we all keep doing this, right? We're you know, and as we get older, we get better at it. But I think it's human instinct to want to organize and understand and explain and to put the narrative together in a way that is, you know, helps us think we understand. Like, for example, in my story, it's like the reality is I thought I was in control by, challenging these kids to do these things to me. But it's like if you take a step back in a larger scale way, in a more spiritual way, I wasn't in control of nothing. Like, that's sad, you know?
Yeah.
That's awful that I would do that to myself to feel okay. And I think, if I've learned anything, it's really to try to kind of keep reminding oneself of what you just said. Nobody's thinking about this the way you're thinking about yourself.
Totally.
And these things aren't as big. Like, nothing matters that much.
Yeah, like you weren't in control of if it happened. You were in control of when it happened, or so you thought. And that you extrapolated that to mean that you were in control, when in reality that was the sort of control that you thought you could have to help you rationalize what was happening, Exactly. But to your point, who knows? Maybe those bullies were, had a terrible home life, and maybe that was their, like, if you, Freaks and Geeks, when the girl invites the main character over to her house, and the dinner starts totally fine. The parents seem normal. I mean, they live in a trailer, but the conversation is completely normal. And then it just devolves so quickly into her just, screeching out of that parking space. And it's like, to people that don't know where that girl is coming from, what her home life is like, they're like, she's bitch. But then the main character goes over to her house and she was like, oh my God, I'm the only friend she has, and this is just her coping mechanism.
Exactly. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, just imagine the pressure you must be under growing up in those circumstances.
Yeah.
That must lead to measuring up, or who knows beyond that what was going on. I don't know, but something, because why else would you be so cruel,
I mean, that's sort of the evolution, right? If we're lucky enough to get to that level, we start to expand our perspective from just us to those around us. And when you can do that and you can have that sort of empathy, then you start to understand where people are coming from. And I can't remember where I read this, but it was something to the effect of when you see somebody do something, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt of the most kind interpretation of the action that they're taking.
Ha, that's fantastic. You just described my wife. Because, as you said in the intro, my driving is aggressive, I think is fair to say. But when sometimes somebody cuts me off or isn't driving in a way that I feel is okay, and I say my words out loud where I become the bully, my wife will be like, that person might be rushing to the hospital because their mother is, about to go into surgery. And I'm like, why do you tell me this stuff? Leave me alone.
Right.
Let me just rant and rave. But
yep.
I mean, that is, to me, and she's probably the most evolved person I know, and it's like, I want to be more like you. But, I wonder sometimes too, Max, like, are there aspects of my personality that are actually copying or mirroring what I was taught on the playground? Do I bully? Are there times when I'm aggressive, or, did I learn to fight back in some ways where, I'm not the most evolved person I could be? Because,
Look, I think the fact that you're asking the question means the answer is no.
Okay.
Right?
I'll take that.
It's like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yep.
At the end, you fight with hugs. And after I watched that movie, I literally the next day started not that I wasn't hugging my kids before, but I hugged them even more.
Yeah, that's great.
And now when we have disagreements or fights or they're, being nasty to each other, I'll just come up to them and give them the biggest hug. And it's crazy because half the time it actually works. That's
fabulous.
It sort of dissolves the tension.
Sure. That's so wise and emotionally intelligent. I should take that.
Don't give me the credit. I saw it in the movie.
Oh, okay. I'll credit them.
But it works.
The Daniels.
That's right. So you talked about the moral of this story. Is there anything you want to add with respect to what you think the moral of the story is?
I guess the moral of the story is it's a cautionary tale, which is be true to oneself. Don't try to be more than you are or who you're not. You'll fly too close to the sun and you will burn up.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what I would say.
We all know what happened to Icarus.
Exactly.
Why did you choose to tell this particular story?
That's a great question. It's funny because when we were talking prior to doing this, and you were giving me the parameters of the podcast, everybody thinks like, oh, I've got a great story, and then when you're forced to think about one story and go well, what story am I going to choose? What story is the story that defines me or that I want to share or whatever? And it was strange because I think ultimately there's a lot of elements to the story that I hope anyway, are interesting. One is the stakes are so high because it gets to life and death almost literally. There's a crazy, ridiculous risk factor that most people in a wish fulfillment kind of way are going I would never do that. Who was stupid enough to do that? But then I think the other part of it, and I don't always tell this aspect of it when I'm telling the story because I might be telling it to people I know who know me, so they kind of have a background on who I am. It's one thing to tell a story about a guy who's, a big, tough professional stuntman who's going to do a high jump for the first time or a high fall. That there's, you're not emotionally really invested in that because the dichotomy in the story isn't that strong. I think the background stuff and getting prepared for this podcast forced me to kind of dig in a little bit and kind of go okay, well, why did I do this? Who am I or who was I? And it opened up other stuff that I've talked about quite a bit, especially in therapy, about who I am and who I became. That was really connected, and so it gave the story maybe what I would call a bottom note or a deeper layer than just sometimes. Usually when I tell the story, it's oh yeah, I've done high falls. What? yeah, and I tell them the story, and I got hit in the head, and people are just like, ah, ha, ha, you're an idiot. And I'm like, yeah, I am an idiot. But there is something, I think rich in that concept we were talking about, that, the things we do to ourselves to survive. And I think that was definitely at play here, and has been at play in so much of my life. And so I guess that's why I chose the story. It's fun. It has a good, backstory, and I think you're hooked in by the risk, and it's got a good payoff, which is that I get, smacked in the head and don't remember anything.
Even though you don't get the part, you get the lesson.
There you go. Look at you. Nice.
Longer term
Very
payoff.
nice. You must do this professionally.
What do you think makes the story work structurally? Because you do a lot of professional storytelling. You understand how a story has to play in order for it to resonate. So from a structural perspective, what makes it good?
I'd say there's several elements that are really important. And one of them is you have to start with an emotional connection to the story. And when I say emotional, that can, like, if you're just going to be funny for funny's sake, like a stand-up telling a story, then you can emotionally connect to people by being hilarious. Mm-hmm. But what does really help is if the audience is able to put itself in the protagonist's shoes and feel like, and relate on some human level. So hopefully the vulnerability of saying, like, I was a beat up kid, and I was like, everybody has a version of that. And so I think there's some universality there. I think, obviously, as I said before, stakes, having high stakes is always important in storytelling. I think probably from a TV writing standpoint or dramatic writing standpoint, stakes is really the most important thing of all, because if the stakes aren't high, and it's the question you get asked by executives all the time in our business, which is like, what are the stakes? What's the jeopardy? What are we rooting for? And it's all the same question, which is like, what is the audience clinging to? Like, I need this answer for myself. Like, what hangs in the balance? So I think that's important. I think surprises or escalations, like, my story doesn't end with me doing my first high fall. My story ends after the CNN crew shows up, and that's like a surprise and an escalation. It takes wow, you actually did the high fall, but wait a second, hold on, it's going to get even crazier. Listen to this. So that adds an element. I think in storytelling, you want to keep turning and twisting. So once you have the stakes in place and the character has his drive to answer the jeopardy, and they're on their way, what are the obstacles that come along? Oh, CNN shows up. Or it's not this tower, it's that tower. Like, so those turns and escalations are, especially in dramatic writing, and I assume in all writing, but specifically for what we do in our business, everything, right? That's where you get an act break. Like in the old days when you used to do commercial TV, and you needed to build to an act break, right? Whoa, shit, that just happened? Wait, oh yeah, come back afterwards, and you'll see what happens now that they're both up there on the platform together with the camera.
Yeah.
So turns, escalations, I think, make a good story. And then a payoff. I mean, you need a big payoff. You need a climax. It needs to build to something that's worth landing on. You don't want your story to fritter out at the end. It's like, and so then I think if I told the story and then, I did my first high fall, and guess what? I lived and I succeeded, and it went okay. It's kind of like a little flat, a little boring.
Yeah.
And the reality is so much more interesting, which is that it goes on from there, and it builds to a bigger payoff. So building a story where it starts kind of small and simple, we all can kind of relate to it, and then it turns and it twists and it escalates, and then boom, it pays off in some big, funny or powerful or dramatic way, or meaningful way. If you can land on something deep, some deep realization or epiphany, that also works too.
And maybe especially if it's not a fully happy ending, like you didn't get the part.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's richness in that. I think, there are those well-made endings where it's just like, and everything worked out, blah, blah, blah. And then that could sometimes be like, that's lovely. The reality of life is, and I think we're seeing this more and more in the kind of dramatic writing we're allowed to do, where comedies and dramas are kind of blending. The beauty of that is you get something that feels a little bit more organic and a little bit closer to all of our lives. It doesn't end like a Brady Bunch episode where
totally,
Jan gets to star in the play or whatever. I don't even think that's an episode, but it should be. You know what? I'm going to write that right now. Let me write that down. But that the endings of a Ted Lasso to Succession, or that were left a little bit more hung in the balance.
Yeah.
Is a beautiful storytelling technique that I think feels like life.
It feels like life, and also you're not letting the audience off the hook.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Like, if you want them to come back,
totally,
it's a great way to do it.
Yeah. I also, as a side note, think that there should be a different perspective. The same story should be told from a different perspective of the CNN cameraman who has never had to climb up one of those towers, let alone with a camera on his shoulder. So he was probably using one arm. And then everybody else that climbed that tower probably jumped off the platform. This dude had to climb back down, knowing that he had priceless footage that he would lose if he dropped the camera or fell. So that dude's stakes were high. And the fact that he did it without even asking when his producer was like, go, I mean, props to that guy.
I love this. You're a genius, because in 30 years of telling this story, I've never thought about that. And he's just the antagonist, the villain of my story. But the fact is, he's got a whole life. And you're right. Like, he did climb up that ladder. It must have been with one arm, because that camera was on his shoulder. He was holding it up there. I don't know how he did that. I don't know who this guy is. And what if he had his own, cross to bear?
Yeah.
And you're right. He probably did have to climb down. I don't remember, because I was, basically unconscious. And he did have valuable footage of me almost losing my life.
Yeah. But, I mean, that guy.
What a cool.
Just imagine what was going through his head.
Maybe I need to look him up. Go have a beer and say.
Most definitely. Probably something harder.
Yes. Yeah, maybe so.
So we've talked a little bit about stories. What, in your mind, makes for a good storyteller?
A good storyteller. Well, I'll give you a couple things here. First of all, passion and a desire to share, and a willingness to peel back that first outer layer and show and be vulnerable and expose some truths that are the kinds of things that I think all of us in our daily life try to cover up. Mm-hmm. So I think being able to kind of maybe pull the curtain back a little bit and show the deeper, darker stuff that's under there is rich, and I think audiences really appreciate that. I think another thing that makes a great storyteller is somebody who is willing to just get out there and fail. Like, anybody who's willing to just throw themselves whole hog into sharing an experience and isn't afraid to maybe fall on their face. I'll give you an example of this. This isn't somebody who was afraid to fail at all. Believe me, this guy. So I worked on 30 Rock with Tracy Morgan. I was on set one day, and Tracy comes up to me. I'm just standing there with my script or whatever, and he comes up to me and he goes, and I'm not going to try and do a Tracy Morgan impression, because there's some people who do a very good Tracy, and I don't. But he's like, I want to open a restaurant. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. What kind of? He goes, and he went into this whole bit about how he wanted to open a pancake house where he was going to do a stage show where he was going to ride one of those old people scooters and jump like Evel Knievel over phone books while people were eating their pancakes. And I was like, what is he he's clearly out of his mind, but okay. And I was kind of egging him along, and he would get more and more detailed about the pancakes and this sort of thing. And somebody else walked over into the conversation, and Tracy turns to this person and goes, I want to open a restaurant. And he starts this story or this bit or this chunk over again, and I was like, oh my God, he's working on material. He was using me to bounce material. And so he starts telling the same story. As he's doing that, he's self-editing, right? Anything I didn't respond to or didn't laugh at, he doesn't touch. It's gone. Anything that I did laugh at, he not only, says again, gets the same laugh, but then expounds upon it and goes further. And then a third person comes over to the conversation. He turns to them and goes, I want to open a restaurant. And then we're right back to the top again. And I'm watching him, and I'm going, son of a bitch, this guy's, he's probably got a Conan appearance or something like that. He's working a bit out. And he is brilliantly on the fly determining what's working, what's not, as he tells this story. this ridiculous, silly story, but I'm watching him work. And I think that's another part of great storytelling is like I said, I've told this story 30 years now. And there are parts of it that I leave out, or there are parts of it that I add in, or like when I knew I was doing this podcast, like I said, I thought, I'll dig a little deeper into this. And, I think having an awareness of what the audience is responding to or not, like where the heart of what you have to share is actually connecting. And that's something that I think takes practice, which is why I think you have to be willing to fail. Yeah. And you have to be willing to kind of like try it. And it's like, okay, the ramp up to this story's too long. Let me get to the cool part. Or, you know what, I didn't really nail the ending. Is there a more profound or more hilarious way that I can like button this thing up? Where's my out? What's my, do I need to like spend a little more time explaining this so that people can follow along and actually get the Jeopardy,
Totally. Yeah. It's crazy how you can't get better at whatever it is you're trying to get better at unless you are willing to be humbled and
no question.
Be a beginner. Because I feel like the older we get, the harder it is for us. I mean, we might be growing on one side of things in terms of understanding who we are and other people don't care, et cetera. But on the other end, we're kind of more and more hesitant to look like beginners because we have all this experience. We've done all these things. We have all these accolades. Why should we, look like beginners? But that's what you have to do for growth. And the fact that he came up to you without, by the way, telling you what he was about to do.
No.
He just went right into it, which is brilliant.
Yep.
And he just processed what you were telling him and immediately used it. And he was like, I don't care if you think this shit's not funny. Maybe you're not my ultimate audience that I actually want to perform this for. Maybe you're just my tester. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm going to get from you what I can. Yeah. And it's going to be filed into my, human computer. And I'm going to come out with a new output for the next person based on, the feedback you gave me. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to try it again. Yes. I'll say something about your beginner thing. I'll let you in on a little thing. I was terrified to come on the podcast today because it's scary to put myself out here like this. And I was in a panic, but I'm always in a panic about, auditions or meetings or, pitches or whatever. So I'm used to it at this point. And I've like kind of worked on the muscle of kind of like, okay, mm-hmm. You're going to go through this process. You're going to go through this. You're going to have a meltdown 7 minutes before and you're going to blah, 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 blah. I mean, I have learned to cope with the pain and the fear of failure well enough to actually show up and click on the link to start the podcast with you. Yeah. But it wasn't easy. And I think that's part of the thing too, is recognizing, you know what? It's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to put oneself out there. And if you're going to be the storyteller in a situation, if you're going to try to connect with people, you're going to have to share a little bit, and you're going to have to get vulnerable and personal. And then you have to just kind of say, you know what? And it's sort of what we've been talking about all along. This is me, mm-hmm. and I'm good enough for me. Yeah. And you might not like me. At the end of the story, you might be bored. You might not care. You might think I'm rambling. You might think this. But you know what? This is who I am. This is what I got. Mm-hmm. Somebody will like it. Somebody will love it. And it might not be you, but I got to give it my best shot. And then the more comfortable you get with the process of saying, I'm going to jump in here and just, I think I can entertain you. I mean, I think for me, that's ultimately the largest goal, is entertainment. Because, you say the moral of the story. I know you often ask in the podcast, like, does every story have to have a moral? And I think, no, they don't. But you could probably find a moral in any story if you look for it. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I kind of subscribe to the Seinfeld approach of like no hugging, no learning. Yeah. That it's maybe not our job when we're telling a story or writing a story to proselytize or to teach a moral or a lesson. Our job is to tell an entertainment that then people can derive from it what it means to them. Everybody's going to have a different opinion or a different takeaway, and that's the good thing. But what you can offer is a human truth that then can be absorbed by the audience, and then that's their business. That's sort of their, like I had an English teacher used to say, chewing gum should be done in the privacy of one's own bedroom. And I'm like, what? but maybe deciding what the moral of the story is also something that should be done in the privacy of one's own bedroom. Because I think when you write to it, you're not doing the fundamental job of capturing an audience and taking them on a ride.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Right. And
you're preaching.
Correct. And if you're good enough as a storyteller to write a story that has that bottom note, then you don't need to sort of cram the moral down the audience's throat, because different people might come away with different morals. Some people might not see a takeaway at all, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Precisely.
What is one of your favorite books that is a really good story that gets storytelling right?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and it is a book, but it's a play. It's a book that is a play that I read when I was in high school. I found it in my high school public library, which is stunning to me in this day, and it brings Chicago back around again too. Which is it's American Buffalo by David Mamet. Which the thing about David Mamet that I fell in love with as a kid, besides all the swear words, which are just beautiful, luscious sentences of foul-mouthed genius. But what Mamet gets so right, and is such a... And by the way, I want to say, I know that politically and otherwise, David might be sort of like a lightning rod right now. But let's just talk about the work. I don't know the man. The writing is so lean and so tight and so unfat that reading and understanding American Buffalo or Glengarry Glen Ross, especially the stage version, is such great tutelage in terms of getting to the point, cutting what's unnecessary, leaving the audience to fill in the blanks. The pauses, like the Pinter pauses that Mamet adapted. We joke about Pinter pauses, but it's like what's not written becomes what is written. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a quick story real quick. When I was a senior in college, I was like, what am I going to do with my life? David Mamet was my idol. I was like, I'll go work for David Mamet. And so I wrote David Mamet like a 6-page letter, like just gushing about how important he was to me. And I sent it. I got an address for a movie he was working on called Things Change, and I sent him this 6-page letter. Please, if there's anything that I could do for you, I don't even need to get paid, blah, blah. And it just, you this, you that, you that. And it was on and on and on. So about a month later, I come home to my rental house at USC, and I open my mailbox, and inside is a letter with the Things Change stationery, and typed up in the upper corner is just the word Mamet.
Oh my God.
I freaked out. I was like, oh my God. Like I still have the letter, obviously, and the envelope, which you can see I ripped open as if I was like, So the letter, basically, I'll quote it to you. It won't take long. He says, Dear Mr. Baer, thank you for your kind note. Unfortunately, I have no position to offer you at this time, but I appreciate you writing and wish you luck in the future. Sincerely, David Mamet.
Amazing.
And to me, that was my first lesson in writing that came at the hand of David Mamet, which was, dude, I didn't need 6 pages.
Yep.
And, the fact that he wrote back at all, in my silly little mind, I take a lesson from it, from Mr. Mamet. He might have just been like, I'll write the kid a note. But to me, the lesson was, calm down. Just keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Get to the point and get out.
Write 6 pages.
Yep.
Sleep on it, and then condense it to 3.
Yes.
Sleep on it again, and then cut it in half until you have a half a page.
Yeah.
And you'll realize how much superfluous shit it was in that original 6 pages.
Oh, I'd be embarrassed to read what I wrote.
I mean, that is normal for a creative. When you read V1, when you're on V4, you're like, oh my God, that was dog shit.
Yeah.
Interesting fact, I once flew to New York for the day to see Glengarry Glen Ross.
Did you?
When Al Pacino reprised his role.
Oh my God.
And I waited for him out back with the program, and he signed it for me.
Oh, how cool.
And I just remember, because I'm such a big fan of the dialogue in that movie,
It's so spectacular.
So to me, it's the 3 finance movies: Glengarry Glen Ross, Wall Street, and Boiler Room.
Terrific.
This was before Billions, right? So I mean, fantastic, really tight dialogue, and just to see Pacino up there,
that's incredible.
It was, oh my God, it was worth.
That must have been amazing.
It was unbelievable.
I saw Peter Falk play the Jack Lemmon role in Chicago on stage. Oh, and I don't know if you know this, but this is another writing thing too. But you know that Alec Baldwin monologue from the movie was not in the original play, but it was so successful and became such a powerful, kind of memorable moment that Mamet then incorporated it into the stage play. But it is not in the original Pulitzer-winning theater piece.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
He pulled a Tracy Morgan.
Yes, he did. Exactly. Hey, that's working. I'm going to put it in.
Yeah. Last question for you. If there is one thing you could say to your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
Oh, boy. Relax. Have fun. Have faith. Trust. It's all going to be okay. You'll get everything that you're meant to get. Mm-hmm. And there's no sense fighting for the things you think you were meant to get that are not your destiny. So just have a good time and stop worrying and angsting so much. It's all going to be fine. You're going to be okay.
Enjoy the ride.
Yes, enjoy the ride.
For what it's worth, it is never too late for that advice for anyone listening, ever.
Yeah, I'll tell you, from my ripe old age of almost 57 now, I'm still teaching myself that every day. Or when I say teaching, trying to teach, I should say, because I'm not learning. I'm still wasting.
Most important thing is the effort.
Yeah.
That's all part of the journey.
For sure.
Well, that does it, my friend.
Thanks,
Emmy
Max.
Award-winning producer and writer Brett Baer. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Max. I had a great time. You have the best voice in podcasting.
I appreciate it.
So soothing.
I appreciate it. For show notes and more, head over to mosspod.org. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast on. This was Moral of the Story. I'm Max Japovsky. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.